Hey, so tonight I decided we're gonna read, based on your feedback, this book. We're gonna do chapter 1 in the intro. It's called The Surrendered Wife by Lara Doyle. And in case you're wondering why I look all glammed up, if I'm gonna surrender, I'm gonna surrender in style. So let's talk a little bit about this book. Hi Sophia. My friend Dina recommended this book because I was thinking about all of the stories that I was hearing, all the stories that I was experiencing. Hey Rose. Okay, I'm so happy you guys are coming in. So today we're going to talk about the intro in chapter 1. And thankfully my children went to sleep at a decent hour, so I was able to read a little bit. And what I read was really thought-provoking. And it kind of made me question when I had been in situations that was not really leading to a happy marriage, the way she was describing. Okay. First of all, I wasn't so impressed with the title. The Surrendered Wife implies that she just gave up and she's like, do whatever you want with me, kind of. Does anyone get that sense? Like, perhaps she should have titled it, like, Empowered Woman? I don't know. Anyway, she says on the cover of this book, it says, The Surrendered Wife is a practical and valuable tool for women wanting to regain intimacy in their relationships. And they're not talking about going to Victoria's Secrets, okay? They're referring to like methods of how to communicate and how to help your spouse and you, okay? That's what I mean. A practical guide to finding intimacy, passion, and peace with a man, as opposed to a woman. I guess that she meant to add that in there. Okay, so let's begin. And if you guys want to get this book, I bought it on Amazon. It wasn't that expensive. I think it was under $10. So she asks in the beginning, why do you want to read this book? And she says, if you're the kind of woman who nags, controls, who struggles with having communication with your husband and like really having that warmth, this book is for you. And she says, surrender to your husband is not about returning to the 50s or rebelling against feminism. Because at first when I read this, I was like, does feel a little bit like that. This book isn't about dumbing down or being rigid. It's certainly not about being subservient, and it follows basic principles. So what are the basic principles? Relinquishing inappropriate control of her husband. Please feel free to add in the comments here what that means, inappropriate control of your husband. What does that mean, to have inappropriate control? She also writes, the basic principles of a surrendered wife are that she respects her husband's thinking. Okay? A lot of times for women that means I gave up control. Like now my opinion doesn't matter. He said he wants this and not that, so therefore I have to agree with him. She's saying different. She's saying respect where he's coming from. And I'm going to tell you how my marriage improved by using some of these tools without realizing I was doing it. I just would practice these mental exercises and I'll tell you what I did. It wasn't like picturing me banging my head against the wall, which, yes, in the beginning it was. Okay. And receives his gifts graciously and expresses gratitude for him. I struggled a lot with this one. Okay. Expresses what she wants without trying to control him. Relies on him to handle household finances. Focuses on her own self-care and fulfillment. All right. A surrendered wife is vulnerable where she used to be a nag. Okay? Trusting where she used to be controlling. Respectful where she used to be demeaning. Grateful where she used to be dissatisfied. Has faith where she once had doubt. All right. Oh, so it's a lot of stuff here. Long before we fell in love and got married, every controlling wife suffered disappointments. At a young age, some of our most basic needs were unmet. So she's saying, what's the origin of control? Where did it all come from? When we were a child, when you were a child, when I was a child, something happened or a series of events happened or something major or maybe something small where we felt lack of control. And because of that, we felt, let's say, humiliated, embarrassed, depressed, hurt, scared. So let's say a close family member died, or something happened in school and you were totally embarrassed and mortified because you had the ugly shirt and your mom couldn't afford the nice clothes. So now you have control problems with like buying things that only you know how to get the right way. So she says it all came from like right before this time. Whatever the cause, we then made an erroneous conclusion that no one could ever take care of us the way we wanted. We embraced the childish belief that if we were always in charge, things were more likely to go our way. We tell ourselves that we are trying to instruct, improve, help others, or do things efficiently. What we're doing really is what we're controlling. We're not really realizing that, because we're labeling it differently, but we are controlling. For instance, I thought I was merely making helpful suggestions when I told my husband that he should ask for a raise. How many of us do that? Ask your boss for more. Okay, well, when I urgently explained that we should have turned right instead of left while riding in a friend's car who knew perfectly well, she gets into details about how she was like always like she need to. I am like that. I'm like a dog with a bone. Like, gotta get to my point. All of these justifications were merely elaborate covers for my inability to trust others. If I had trusted my husband was earning as much money as he could, I wouldn't have emasculated him by implying that I found him lacking ambition. She goes on to say, if I had trusted other situations, I wouldn't have been so adamant about making sure it's done a certain way. I would just relinquish control. Trusting is magical because people tend to live up to our expectations. And how true is that, right? Children live up to our expectations, so do our spouses, and so do we. We have to expect better from ourselves. If you make it clear to your husband that you expect him to screw up at work, wreck the car, neglect his health, you are setting a negative expectation. If you, on the other hand, expect him to succeed, he's more likely to succeed. So what does it mean to trust? What does it mean to trust someone? Trust someone means you put your full confidence in them. And trusting means you anticipate the best outcome, she writes, not the worst when he's in charge. Being able to just let it go. Let it go. You see, this is where I actually practice something like this. I let go of the outcome. I didn't necessarily trust him, but I let go of the outcome where if it doesn't work out, I just experienced in my mind, what's the worst case? Like, what's the worst case that could happen? My kid doesn't end up in school that day because I left him to be responsible to get him ready for school, and worst case scenario, so he ends the day in school at home. I accept the challenge, not the stress. And what really happened was when I let go of controlling, like, it has to be a certain way. Wow. He actually met where I didn't expect. And that difference right there, that was my confidence in him. Like, that lacking, that was like, wow, I really didn't. Pleasantly surprised. She says you actually should trust them to do the right thing and have confidence in them. If you're not there yet, which I wasn't, and it helped me anyway to reach a point of like trust in our marriage, I just envisioned what's the worst case scenario, and if I'm okay with that, I'm gonna let go and let him handle it. Those of us who have trouble trusting others, when every rational indicator says that we are safe, are reacting to our own fear. We may be afraid that we won't get what we need, or that we'll get it too late. Basically, you're afraid of like losing resources, time, money. Like, he's not going to pull through. We're going to be late if I just leave it in his hands. The bills aren't going to get paid because he's not going to be responsible. Like, you're going to lose money because you're going to have late fees. So you have to control all these things about the relationship. Okay? So she's saying we may fear that we'll spend too much money or have to do extra work. It could be, and often is, that we fear loneliness, boredom, or discomfort. If you are like me and find yourself driven to correct, criticize, and conquer a partner, then you are reacting to your fears. This is so valuable when I read this, because everything you do, everything anyone around you does, it's a direct reflection of what that person has ever gone through, experienced, and therefore you should not take it personally. You should not take it to heart. Be like, how could he talk to me like that? How come that happened? It's not about you. It's about the way they've experienced life. And the same way you've experienced life, now you have trouble with the trust. You need to work on that piece of yourself. It's not that it's his fault. And she talks about a piece where, like, when can you not surrender? Like, there are people who you really can't do this with, what she's trying to explain. Okay. So, whatever the situation is, if you do not react to your fear of the outcome, you don't need to try to dominate. You just don't need to try, because you're not so, like, anticipating and scared. As it turns out, my fears were a conditioned response I had developed over the years to hide my own vulnerability. And she goes on to say, what's the opposite of intimacy? What do you think the opposite of intimacy is, if anyone wants to drop a comment here? So the opposite of intimacy is control. Control and intimacy are opposing each other. When you let go, you can be more intimate in many different ways. If I want one, I can't have the other. Without being vulnerable, I can't have intimacy. Without intimacy, there can't be any romance or emotional connection. When I'm vulnerable with my husband, the intimacy, passion, and devotion seem to flow naturally. Okay, so now she says how she was always on edge, how she was always, like, ready to get out of the marriage. She was always like, you know what, I could do better than you. I married beneath you. And I want to basically go. If I need to go, I'm ready. My bags are packed. And that attitude in the relationship really set the standard to, like, very, very low, because there wasn't any trust in the marriage that it could work. Okay, so she writes, why this book isn't called The Surrendered Husband. If you're a wife who feels overwhelmed, lonely, and responsible for everything, this book is perfect for you. If you can admit that you frequently or sometimes control, nag, or criticize your husband, then it's up to you and you alone to take the actions described here to restore intimacy to your marriage and dignity and peace to yourself. If you want something different, guys, you got to do it differently. And that's not to say he has no role in this relationship. The surrendered wife makes it sound like she's the one who has to do 100% of her work and his work. The woman is just saying, do 100% of your work and focus on yourself. I'm not saying, she writes, that you are responsible for every problem in the marriage. You're not. But you can't improve what's not in your control. You can't improve him. He's not in your control. And you can't make him change, only yourself. You can't make him change, only yourself. The good news is that since you've identified the behaviors that contribute to this problem, you can now put your energy into focusing on making your marriage happy. Because you do have energy, you're just investing it into frustration that he's not good enough. All right. Now she writes, when not to surrender and get out. So this is like for the people who are not supposed to be reading this book. They need to be like going to either marriage counseling or going to like divorce court, the way she's describing it. Do not surrender to a man who's physically abusive to you, physically abusive to your children, who has an active addiction, like gambling, alcohol, drugs. Why? Because they can't be trusted. You can't just trust that type of individual. He has an addiction to gambling. And you cannot surrender to a man who is chronically unfaithful. I mean, this is all intuitively correctly, but just in case you need to know that, that's here. What about verbal abuse? Women sometimes ask me if they should leave a husband who is verbally abusive. This is an important question because verbal abuse crushes your sense of self-worth over time, just as physical abuse does. You certainly don't deserve to be belittled. Fortunately, as you will see, Respecting your husband and refraining from controlling him will put an end to his hurtful words, as long as he doesn't fall into one of the 4 categories above. Here's why. This is really, I just highlighted the whole page. This is so helpful. I think I'm just going to take a picture of this and post it on my page because this was like all over underlined. If he is insulting, check to see if you have a culture of verbal abuse in your relationship. This kind of mistreatment is very rarely a one-way street and is often a man's way of protecting himself against ongoing insults and emasculation. Again, it is not your fault if your husband is verbally abusing you, but your behavior influences him and eggs him on. And we know that. I mean, we have the power, right? We have the power to say things that are like just pushing him over the edge. Okay. One woman complained to me that her husband had called her terrible names while they argued and that his verbal abuse was simply intolerable. As we talked some more, now she says, I found out the woman was also kind of saying things to him that was disrespectful and also hard. So she said, instead of asking for both of them to apologize, she writes this, rather than this author trying to convince the woman that they both needed to apologize, I decided to take a different track. I asked her what was more important to her, his apology, which is also her ego, or restoring harmony. And obviously restoring harmony, right, was more important to this woman. And what happened when she realized that? Her husband responded by apologizing for what he had said in his anger, because she took a step in the right direction. So this book is really about learning to play above the line and trying to own up to your own actions. All right, so Chapter 1, that was all the intro. Chapter 1, respect the man you married by listening to him. Respect the man you married by listening to him without criticizing him. I mean, this is easy to say, right? This is what is the recipe for a happy marriage, at least from one end. Without criticizing him, insulting him, laughing at him, or making fun of him. Accept him. Accept him the way he is. Even if you disagree with him, do not dismiss his ideas. If you have said or done something disrespectful, apologize for that. I mean, I feel like this is like pre-1A. Like, if you did something hurtful, say, I'm sorry, right? In marriage, as in nature, water seeks its own level. We marry men who match us. She writes, for years, I secretly believed I had married a man below myself. But I was wrong. In reality, this delusion was a convenient way to make me feel good about myself for my rudeness, for my criticism, for my behavior when he did something that I saw as wrong. I had validation to say, why'd you do that? Like, I wouldn't do that because I would secretly think I'm married above. I like married beneath myself, right? Okay. She writes how even men who are multimillionaires, then she writes one specific example, he only wanted respect. From all the things he could ever ask for, he asked for respect. If you don't think your husband deserves your respect, this is good homework. If you don't think your husband deserves your respect, ask yourself, what did you marry him? What qualities did you like when you married him? What did you enjoy about him in the first place? What attracted you to him at that time? And that time you actually trusted and you admired him. Think of those qualities that you liked about him. Chances are he's not all that different now, and therefore is still worthy of your admiration. Okay. I think there's much more here, but it's already been like 20 minutes. I think we should cut it for tonight. And let's do a homework assignment. And all of us should remember, maybe even write it down, what it is that we liked about our husbands when we first met them. Not to say, I liked it when you did that, but you don't do that anymore. Seek out what you like. And just like when you have a red car, you start finding red cars. When you have thoughts of good qualities, you start seeing them all around you. So that's the homework assignment for tonight. And hopefully we'll get back on this after the holidays. Happy holidays to you. Happy Chag Shavuot and Shabbat Shalom. Have a good night. Bye, everyone. Bye.